This scandal began with a tip-off. In May 1970, the leader of the opposition had urgent news for the Taoiseach. There was a conspiracy at the very heart of government. A plot to send guns to Northern Ireland.
You had Irish government money being spent on arms for use in Northern Ireland. You had senior government ministers allegedly involved with the IRA.
The Taoiseach was forced to act. 2 of his ministers were dismissed and charged with illegal gun running.
Even after 50 years, these events are extraordinary.
The trial at Dublin's forecourts was recorded on tape. Those tapes were never made public, until now. From the witness box, an army officer revealed details of the secret plan.
As regards Bossman, it would refer to Mr. Haughey.
The officer said he was following orders. So where is the truth?
All he had to do was say, stop.
Charlie Haughey and Neil Blaney were more than economical with the truth.
There was lies told by all sorts of people, big lies told by big people.
Lynch did not tell the truth. He had something to hide.
I call it Ireland's dirty secret. It's like the Sherlock Holmes quote, when you eliminate everything but the facts, however unlikely they appear, it's the truth.
Where it began, I can't begin to knowing.
He was a typical 1970s, 80s dad. He wasn't going to tell you he loved you in any way, but you knew he did.
Wasn't the spring.
When it happened, when I was very young, I do remember that sort of sense of there was a crisis in the house. It was almost like there had been an accident or something like that, and there was sort of life before the accident and life after the accident.
In August 1969, Captain James Kelly of the Irish Army was on a private visit to Northern Ireland. Captain Kelly was headed for trouble, in more ways than one.
Once the first baton crashed down on the first head, things changed in Derry, things changed in Northern Ireland indeed.
1969 was a year of conflict between the mainly nationalist civil rights movement and the unionist government. Events came to a head at the Battle of the Bogside in Derry.
People are demanding change, and they're demanding it now, and they're expecting to get support from the South. The nationalists are heavily outgunned, and there's a real sense that there could be a pogrom on the scale of the 1920s. So there is a sense of terror, and there's a feeling that this could happen right across the north.
We had the RUC coming into the Bogside and coming up our street, sort of, and smashing windows and shouting insults at people, singing, "Hey, hey, we're the monkeys, and we're going to monkey around until we see your blood flowing all along the ground." That was the police doing that. When you're in a situation in which the police are part of the attacking force against your community, the only answer to it is to take on the police.
Tension mounts this afternoon.
Within days, the fighting spread across Northern Ireland to Belfast.
Captain Kelly was a Cavan man and loyal and extremely effective army officer.
There's going to be more trouble tonight.
Concerned by what he saw, Captain Kelly reported the escalating crisis to Army headquarters in Dublin.
Captain Kelly was working for G2, Irish Military Intelligence. His boss was Colonel Heffron, and Captain Kelly happened to be visiting his brother in August 1969 when the trouble was brewing. And that was a stroke of luck insofar as G2 intelligence gathering was concerned, because they had now one of their most senior officers in Belfast watching what was going on.
And he became Colonel Michael Heffron's eyes and ears, basically, on the northern conflict.
Say
revolution. Well, you know.
They tell us, carry on Fianna Fáil, we are with you.
In Dublin, Fianna Fáil was in power, the self-declared Republican Party that for 2 generations had opposed partition.
At every party occasion, the old chestnut of a united Ireland would be raised. That was the rhetoric.
Fianna Fáil played, if you like, the anti-partitionist card, but in reality implemented no coherent policies which would in any way seek to address the issue of Northern Ireland.
The events of 1969 brought all of that home. So suddenly we had this conflagration happening on the streets of Derry and Belfast, of Catholics being hounded from their homes, of whole streets being set on fire. Suddenly, Fianna Fáil was confronted with its own past.
The government was led by Jack Lynch, one-time sporting hero and the first Fianna Fáil leader not from the revolutionary generation.
There was always a sense that he wasn't there for the long haul. It didn't matter when he became party leader, but it mattered after 1969 that he lacked the Republican pedigree that others might have claimed.
At Cabinet, there were demands for a tough response to support the nationalist community and put pressure on the British government to act.
They argued. This was a very stressful moment. The North was in flames and the Irish government had to do something. And some of the more hot-headed among the cabinet members wanted the Irish army to make a decisive move and cross the border and internationalise the conflict so that the United Nations would get drawn in.
The influence of the tough talk was evident when Lynch made his first statement on the crisis.
The present situation is the inevitable outcome of the policies pursued for decades by successive Stormont governments. It is clear also that the Irish government can no longer stand by and see innocent people injured and perhaps worse.
In the North, the speech had a dramatic impact on both communities.
Jack Lynch, he has done more hours to help the people of Derry than they expected him to do.
I agree. Excitement ran through the area, so that the militancy and the determination to do battle against the northern state was boosted to a very significant degree by a belief created by Jack Lynch's speech that the Irish army was on standby at the border or even over the border and ready to move into the Bogside.
The behaviour of the Dublin government has been deplorable, and it has been tailor-made to inflame opinion on both sides.
Things were bad enough, and here was the Prime Minister of the Irish Republic wading in with size 12 boots with a can of petrol to throw on the fire. So another government in another country was saying to me, you might think you're British, you might think you're part of Northern Ireland, but you're really part of an Irish state. We just haven't taken over yet.
In the days after Jack Lynch's speech, Belfast was in flames. The Royal Ulster Constabulary used heavy machine guns in nationalist areas. In just 24 hours on August 15th, the death toll was 7.
The 9-year-old boy, Patrick Rooney, was shot dead in his bed.
The machine gunned us.
All those
people.
did you shoot
back? Well, what with pea shooters and battles? Armoured cars, paving the way for the hooligans to come in?
I think that Jack Lynch made a threat or a promise, which in the event he was unable to carry out or unwilling to carry out. That was dangerous politics in relation to the North.
Nationalists left their burned-out homes in Belfast and looked for help.
They destroyed people's homes and they broke them up.
The Irish Army was ordered by government to set up refugee camps near the border. Thousands, mainly women and children, were given emergency accommodation.
And the crowds in O'Connell Street want action from the Irish government.
Appalled by events in the north, people crowded onto the streets of Dublin.
What man can defend his wife and family with sticks and stones? It's arms we want!
You've got several nights of demonstrations in Dublin where people are demanding government intervention, are demanding arms, are attacking the British Embassy. Almost everyone in the Republic at the time claimed to believe in a united Ireland. So people in Fine Gael, people in Labour, people in the trade unions, all of them are collecting money in support of Northern nationalists. Many of them are prepared to give money even though they know it will probably go for some form of armed defence.
To make a token showing and to capture a portion of Fermanagh.
I myself am a member of the Fianna Fáil party. Now, just listen to me for a second. Just listen.
There were demands to send in Irish troops, or else provide nationalists with the means to defend themselves.
I support the invasion of the north of Ireland. I support it.
The Cabinet was in emergency session. Ministers were given specific roles in response to the crisis. One of them had kept his views on Northern Ireland close to his chest.
He was no more anti-English, I would say, than any other Irish person. But he was familiar with the situation in the north. I'd say he would have been moved by it. I don't think any of them ever considered invading the north to end partition.
Charles J. Haughey was one of the most brilliant and ablest politicians of his generation. He had an extraordinary appetite for hard work. However, on the opposite side, Haughey was also a deeply flawed character.
Well, will he not receive the deputation? Why not?
When Haughey entered a room, people would shake in fear. The comparison with Napoleon I is being often used to describe Charles J. Haughey. Small in stature, but his personality was very overpowering.
That's that. We're not taking no for an answer. OK, right on. God bless. Thanks. Bye.
As Finance Minister, Charles Haughey was put in charge of a relief fund for Northern nationalists. The money available was £100,000, a considerable amount in 1969.
It was money without strings. By the government decree, he had sole and total control of the money and no stipulation as to how it should be used.
Within 9 months, Charles Haughey will be dismissed from government and accused with 4 others of illegal gun running.
I want our people from the 6 counties to know that we here on this side of the border, we do care.
Neil Blaney never concealed his strong Republican views. Blaney's political base was close to the border in Donegal.
Neil Blaney was an enigma. If Fianna Fáil or Daesh needed somebody to remind them of the national ambition in relation to a united Ireland, there was no better man than Neil Blaney.
Neil Blaney's days as Minister for Agriculture are also numbered. He will soon join Charles Haughey on the list of accused.
We're all Irish and we're going to get together, and I hope in the not too distant future.
As an Ulsterman and more importantly a Donegal man, this was an attack on his people. Knowing the old man, you know, you just give him a task, set him on it, he'll sort it. Simple as.
Meanwhile, nationalists in Northern Ireland were unprotected and distrustful of the RUC. By 1969, the IRA had wound down its military campaign and was caught unprepared. Instead, ad hoc citizen defence committees scrambled to build barricades and help people left homeless by the riots.
I suppose the best word that I could use to describe Daddy would be charismatic. Sure, you know, everybody thinks their own daddy, there's nobody like them, you know, and I suppose because I was the only one, you know, there was more love lavished on you as well, you know. Daddy became involved as a coordinator of the Citizens' Defence Committees.
John Kelly from Belfast took part in IRA campaigns in the 1950s.
It would be fatal for me personally to sort of specify what particular operations I was engaged in.
He was from a staunchly Republican family. His Republican credentials were there. He had spent 8 years in Crumlin Road Prison. Never once would he have ever tried to disown or tried to distance himself from an armed campaign.
Like scores of others, John Kelly came south expecting help from the government.
The view within the government was that money should be given to the nationalists who had arrived in various delegations at the government store and who wanted help to defend themselves, primarily. As John Kelly said memorably in court, they weren't looking for blankets or bottles to feed babies. They were looking for guns to defend themselves against deadly attack.
John Kelly of the Belfast IRA and Captain James Kelly of Irish Army Intelligence will also join the list, accused of illegal gun running. By September 1969, British troop numbers in the north were over 7,000. They brought welcome relief to nationalist areas, for now. Jack Lynch retreated from his dramatic August speech and took a softer tone.
Well, it's obvious that the events of the past week have not improved relations, but it'll be our job to build up goodwill again, to build up good relations, and I believe this will be possible.
He had made his famous "We won't stand idly by" speech. Shortly after that, he made a much more conciliatory speech, which was much more true to his political leanings, calming things down. But at the same time, he was under pressure from his own cabinet, and he was under pressure from these delegations which were coming down. They were visiting him and others, and he was fobbing them off.
Do you think they're a serious threat, the IRA? No, we don't think they are.
He had no intention, if he could help it, in having arms supplied.
But even as Lynch was rejecting violence, close to the border, the Irish Army was preparing to train nationalists from Derry.
Well, it was two-faced, two sides to government policy. There was a hidden policy which had to involve moves to protect nationalists.
The week-long course at Dunree Army Camp in Donegal was approved by Defence Minister James Gibbons.
They took onto the books men from a nationalist background into the reserve forces, the FCA, and took them to the ranges and taught them how to fire weapons.
A number of people who went from the bog side down into Donegal to be trained in that way and then came back after about a week. And I remember talking to me, he says, "Oh, you should have been there, McCann, you should have been there." Could you assemble and disassemble a Thompson submachine gun while blindfold at night? The circumstances in which this might be necessary were very unclear to me and to many other people. It was that type of thing, and straightforward target practice on how to use a gun and how to use it safely.
But word of the camp was leaked to newspapers, and the gun training was abruptly abandoned. In the months ahead, guns bought with Irish government money will take centre stage.
If guns were for defensive purposes, why were machine guns included?
Those weapons are for point-blank operations in the urban environment, concealed weapons, producing them at the last moment, and
It was known to Mr. Blaney on the occasion of this telephone call you made to from the continent that you were on the continent getting untraceable guns.
I had conveyed to him how the situation was developing, so Mr. Blaney would certainly know.
By October 1969, Captain James Kelly was the main link between Irish Army Intelligence and John Kelly of the Defence Committees. They wanted guns to protect nationalists in Northern Ireland.
Captain Kelly was a very loyal army officer, and I think that he took risks. I think he was motivated by high principles, but I think it led him into a very dangerous area.
as army officers, each of us swears a solemn oath of allegiance to uphold the Constitution. You hold the Bible up in the right hand and you swear to only follow lawful orders.
Come closer and listen. The beat of my heart keeps on missing.
On October 4th, Captain Kelly arranged a meeting with the defence committees in his hometown of Ballyborough in County Cavan.
At the Ballyborough meeting, Captain Kelly was trying to get the Northern Defence Committees all on the same page. Money was available, and Kelly wanted to know how the Defence Committees wished to use such money.
They wanted arms, they wanted the training in Fort Dunree reactivated, and they communicated all of this to Captain Kelly, who communicated it to Colonel Heffron, who communicated it to Jim Gibbons, the Minister for Defence. So everybody at Cabinet knew that Captain Kelly was meeting with the Citizens' Defence Committees.
But Captain Kelly's activities were also noted by Garda Special Branch. No one told the branch that Captain Kelly was working on army orders. Reports of the Ballyborough meeting were sent by the Special Branch to Peter Berry, Secretary of the Department of Justice. It was so urgent that Berry was contacted while in hospital, recovering from heart treatment.
Peter Berry was a very old-style civil servant. He joined the Department of Justice in 1927, and his first minister was assassinated by the IRA in that year, Kevin O'Higgins. So this may have coloured his judgment.
When Berry came across it, he had no mechanism to understand why it was that the Irish Army and its officers were in the business of providing guns to Northern Republicans, which to Berry could only mean one thing: IRA, and enemies of the state.
Peter Berry called Jack Lynch to his bedside to warn the Taoiseach of a grave danger, as Berry saw it, to the security of the state.
Berry, he was in Mount Carmel, and he was aware of the Ballyborough meeting, and Jack Lynch came and visited him. And he was that powerful that Jack Lynch would go and visit him. And he told him about this. Now, Jack Lynch later on denied it and said, no, this didn't happen.
I think Jack Lynch wanted the problem to go away. He doesn't seem to have taken the information on board, or if he did take the information on board, he didn't do anything with it.
There's more to suggest that Jack Lynch was aware of a plan to provide guns for the North. On February 6, 1970, his government issued an urgent directive to the Irish Army Chief of Staff.
This was the most critical time for Irish internal security since World War II. These extraordinary documents were top secret, and it's asking the Chief of Staff very explicitly to prepare and to plan for a military intervention in Northern Ireland.
It was always going to be a dangerous, fraught policy, and the army were frankly shit scared of it.
The directive also instructed the army to have guns ready to supply to Northern nationalists in a doomsday situation.
This was the essence of the hidden policy on Northern Ireland, which was entirely defensive-minded, but could never be admitted, because it would have destroyed diplomatic relations with the United Kingdom.
This government directive from 1970 came to light 30 years later when released to the National Archives in 2001.
A lot of the cabinet who are present say that they didn't know anything about it. Well, they may not have known about it, but the directive was issued to the Chief of Staff by the Minister for Defence with the wording that the government had instructed him.
The Army's readiness to respond was soon put to the test. The flashpoint was Ballymurphy, a nationalist council estate in West Belfast. Faced with loyalist attacks and ineffective control by the British Army, the nationalists pleaded for outside help. Fears of a doomsday took hold in Dublin. Neil Blaney contacted Defence Minister James Gibbons, who instructed the army to move weapons closer to the border. A convoy of trucks was loaded with 500 rifles, 80,000 rounds of ammunition, and 3,000 gas masks.
It was the most dangerous moment in the whole arms crisis. Irish Army rifles sent on Irish Army lorries by order of the Minister for Defence, Jim Gibbons. This is the real thing.
They moved 500 assault rifles to Dundalk Barracks. That consists of a considerable portion of Ireland's arsenal. You don't move equipment and material around unless you have a very, very good reason for doing it.
But after several days of fighting, an uneasy calm was restored in Ballymurphy. And those army guns never crossed the border.
If these rifles with full Irish Army identification stamped on them had been distributed to the people in Ballymurphy, it would have raised the most amazing diplomatic furore with the British.
When these weapons were being transported, they were being transported at night time, and they were crisscrossing back roads, and there were gas masks on the lorries, and some of them were flying off, and the next morning they were being found by children. Again, it underlines how ad hoc this thing was, how badly organised it was.
The focus then switched overseas to weapons that couldn't be traced back to the Irish Army. And Neil Blaney was the link man.
Neil Blaney had a friend, Albert Lykes, who was a Belgian-born businessman. He lived in Sutton in County Dublin.
His knowledge of German and his contacts were the reason Albert Lykes was drawn into the affair.
Lykes knew somebody who knew a dealer called Otto Schluter, who was based in Hamburg.
Otto Schluter was a man with many enemies and a lot of luck.
Schluter had a dodgy reputation. He got involved in the grey area of the arms trade, you might say. He had been accused of ripping off clients in the Arab world in a deal, and there were at least 2 attempts made on Schluter's life in the 50s. Bombs were placed in his Mercedes car. One explosion killed his mother.
Captain Kelly, John Kelly and Albert Lykes made several trips to Germany to arrange a deal with Otto Schluter.
Would it be a correct description of it to say that yourself and Mr. Schleifer appear to be in very bad humour?
When I said to Herr Slater, you better show me this stuff, he said, do you not believe me, or words to that effect? And I said, must see it. So I went down to inspect the goods.
The Irish visitors had a shopping list. 400 submachine guns, 400 pistols, 25 heavy machine guns, and 250,000 rounds of ammunition.
If guns were for defensive purposes, why were machine guns included?
The weapons are of a very particular type. Now, submachine guns and automatic pistols, they're for use in confined environments, like, you know, weapons that could be easily concealed and transported around in the boot of a Ford Cortina. So those weapons are for point-blank operations in the urban environment, concealed weapons, producing them at the last moment, and bang.
£28,000 was paid to Schluter. Most of the money came from the relief fund approved by the Irish government in August 1969.
Sitting in the morning sun, I'll be sitting.
The initial plan was to ship the consignment from Hamburg in Germany via Belgium to Dublin.
Then I'll watch them roll away.
Delivery was promised for March 25th, 1970. Customs clearance was provided by the Revenue Commissioners with the approval of Finance Minister Charles Haughey. Captain Kelly and John Kelly were on the quayside early to watch the unloading of the cargo.
Look like nothing's gonna come my way.
When the ship arrived, there were no arms on board, and it emerged that the Belgian customs had stopped the export because there was no proper paperwork to cover the export of the arms. One has to bear in mind that possibly Schluter was playing his own game.
After the failed attempt to bring guns in by sea, the focus shifts again, this time to Vienna Airport.
Well, the next attempt came in April, and Captain Kelly went to Europe and he actually managed to procure arms, and he was going to fly them in this time.
Plans to use an Aer Lingus passenger flight into Dublin Airport were dropped in favour of a charter aircraft. But in all the chopping and changing, the cover was blown.
Everything was pretty much ready to go, and then information reaches the special branch that the weapons are coming in. This caused consternation, and this had Peter Berry up all night.
Once again, Peter Berry, Secretary of the Department of Justice, was left out of the loop. Berry told the special branch to impose a security lockdown on Dublin Airport and to seize the guns and the people involved. When Charles Haughey heard of Peter Berry's intervention, he phoned Berry at home.
Charlie Haughey asked Peter Berry specifically, would it be possible to allow that consignment to be cleared by customs? And Peter Berry, who was very opposed to any arms coming in, said that that wasn't possible and it wasn't going to happen.
Berry, getting the call, decided that Haughey was trying to arm the IRA, which was a bad misjudgment on his part because he knew Haughey well. He'd worked closely with him. He'd seen Haughey crush the IRA in the early 60s, the previous campaign of violence. But yet he decided that Haughey was acting treacherously and seditiously.
And then Charlie Haughey asked him what was going to happen to the consignment, and he said, we're going to grab it. And Charlie Haughey said, I'd better call it off. And he used 3 words, or he claimed that he used 3 words, whatever it is. And that whatever it is clause was used by Charlie Haughey as an excuse really to say that he wasn't aware of the nature of the consignment.
But either way, the game was up. Haughey sent word to Captain Kelly and the delivery was cancelled. The guns never came.
Gave chase. The raiders turned and opened fire.
Meanwhile, the public mood had changed. In O'Connell Street, where crowds once called for guns, they now mourned a victim of Republican violence. Garda Richard Fallon had been shot and killed by Saor Éire, a splinter group of the IRA.
Garda Fallon has a huge funeral in Dublin. There's a deep shock at the killing. And this means, of course, that the reality of political violence is coming home to some people. There's greater worry about what access to arms might mean, and also then the worry about, is the North spilling over?
Outside official circles in Dublin, the plan to import guns was still a secret. But that was about to change. Peter Berry went to Jack Lynch to personally inform him of the involvement of Haughey and Blaney in the affair.
Berry now has really stuck his neck on the block on this one. But in Lynch's mind, he must have now had this dread and fear that if this information comes out, it's going to kick over a hornet's nest in the north.
Lynch's instinct was to keep things quiet. But then someone leaked the story to Liam Cosgrave, leader of the opposition.
The note said, don't let this scandal be covered up. So when Cosgrave got it, obviously he was in shock.
No, there'd be no arrest.
Can you give any further detail?
It was seismic in terms of the impact that it had on not just the fate of the Fianna Fáil party, but more broadly Irish democracy.
There's no more to be said. This is a social occasion.
By May 1970, attempts to secretly import arms into Ireland had been quietly dropped. But a public sensation was on the way.
Liam Cosgrave is leader of the opposition. He's also the son of W.T. Cosgrave, who led independent Ireland in the first 10 years of independence.
Liam Cosgrave arrived at the Taoiseach's door with news of a grave threat to the state. It was also a golden opportunity to embarrass the Fianna Fáil government.
The note listed several people: Captain James Kelly, Colonel Hefferon, then you had Ministers Gibbons, Haughey, Blaney. And the note said, don't let this scandal be covered up.
Lynch was in a tight corner and played for time.
I believe that Jack Lynch must have said, well, Liam, you're right about this, but you're wrong about Gibbons. He'd nothing to do with this.
Jack Lynch is very keen to present this narrative that the government had no knowledge of what was going on, that Haughey and Blaney acted without any authority, especially Gibbons' authority, and that this wasn't wider collusion within the government.
Gibbons was the Minister of Defence and therefore entitled to import weapons, and if he was seen to be involved, the operation was legitimate.
Jack Lynch effectively has been caught with his hand in the cookie jar. He had to act. He had to save his party. He did. He threw men overboard.
We're caught in a trap. I can't walk out.
Overnight, Charles Haughey and Neil Blaney were dramatically dismissed from government.
After that announcement was made, it was a huge sensation.
Why can't you see?
Waking up in the morning, you're listening to the news. 2 ministers had been sacked, 2 very powerful men. Why? Because they were importing arms illegally. Where was the money coming from this? There were crazy rumours that this was for the benefit of the IRA.
Kevin Boland resigned from Cabinet in protest at Jack Lynch's action.
Have you anything to say at all, Mr. Brown? No. Gun running. So this, in fact, was the basic cause?
No, I didn't say so.
But those in the know were tight-lipped.
And at the moment you have no plans to say anything?
I'm not planning anything.
If my old man and Haughey, if they were acting like on their own volition, well, he would have been right to fire them immediately.
That night, Blaney and Haughey took the fight to a Fianna Fáil parliamentary party meeting.
They literally turned their backs on the very people who had done everything possible, not just for the country and for the party, but for the people, both north and south. And they hung them out to dry.
Faced with the prospect of a bruising split, the party closed ranks behind Lynch. But the row was far from over.
And then we had this extraordinary Dáil debate that went on for 37 hours continuously. And it led to scenes of pandemonium with very drunken deputies. But it culminated with the Fianna Fáil government surviving.
By the end of May, criminal proceedings were underway. The 2 former ministers, Blaney and Haughey, along with Captain Kelly, John Kelly and Albert Leix, were charged with conspiracy to import arms illegally.
I don't think he felt that he was going to be arrested. For the people to say this was this rogue army officer that had sort of, a maverick type that had gone native, so to speak, that really galled him, that really, really hurt him.
On the privilege of the Dáil today, Mr. Gibbons has attacked me. All he has said is a tissue of lies.
The charges against Neil Blaney were dropped due to lack of evidence. The remaining 4 were sent for trial. The 4 courts in Dublin had never seen a trial quite like this.
It was a sensation, not just from the Irish media, but also from the British media.
There were 2 trials. First trial imploded because an unfair allegation was made about the judge.
For the first time, the judge directed that court proceedings be recorded. Only a fragment of those tapes survived and were never made public. Until now.
And I submit to you, gentlemen, on behalf of Mr. Haughey, that nothing was done or said in pursuance of any conspiracy on the part of either Mr. Haughey or any of the other accused.
There was lies
told by all sorts of people, big lies told by big people. Whether my father lied or not, I don't know. That's an allegation that's made against him.
3 of the accused freely admitted the attempt to import guns, but said it was officially approved. Only Charles Haughey said he was unaware that guns were involved.
He was facing a long jail term, so I guess he did what he had to do.
The state case relied on 2 key witnesses, Minister James Gibbons and Colonel Michael Hefferon of Military Intelligence.
I describe Jim Gibbons as having been tied to the mast of a ship and pushed out of the harbour into the storm by Jack Lynch.
Hefferon explained he was advising Gibbons constantly, meeting him regularly as Director of Military Intelligence, and at the same time, he was Captain Kelly's boss.
You regard yourself as having got the authorization directly from Mr. Gibbons yourself?
Mr. Gibbons was fully informed of the operation, so what I was carrying out was a military operation with the full approval and consent of the Minister for Defence.
And when Gibbons said that he really didn't know very much about what was going on, Hefferon's evidence was that he told him what was going on.
Gibbons did admit that he had Captain Kelly in his office, that they had discussed the weapons coming into Dublin port, that he was there when Captain Kelly explained to him that this importation had not succeeded and that there was going to be a subsequent attempt to bring the guns in again later on.
Mr. Gibbons, if he did not agree with the operation, all he had to do was say stop.
The Minister for Defence was the one person who could have made the importation that Captain Kelly was engaged in legal. And that was what the jury eventually decided, that the Minister for Defence knew about it. They kind of looked at each other, light bulb moment, and said, basically, you know, this trial should never have reached us.
And I say to you, gentlemen, that you can do your duty in this case in only one way, and that is by returning a verdict of not guilty.
Oh, well, the comment I have to offer is that the court found them not guilty as well, they were entitled to do.
There was jubilation outside when all 4 accused were acquitted.
Well, I feel a hell of a lot better than 5 weeks ago, I can tell you that.
This trial was a pantomime, and that's what we believe. But this has been our vindication.
You want Jack Lynch to resign? I couldn't care less what he does.
Vindication for some, but a disaster for Jack Lynch and his government. Charles Haughey was quick to pile on the pressure.
And I think that those who are responsible for the debacle have no alternative now but to take the honourable course which is open to them.
But Haughey misjudged the show of support. In America, for much of the trial, Jack Lynch returned to a stage-managed welcome from party loyalists.
There was a solid phalanx of the parliamentary party behind him. And they included some of the old guys from the revolutionary period. And De Valera had sent his own private secretary. It was almost as if Dev was giving his imprimatur to Lynch.
The government decided to basically ignore the acquittals. It was the view of Jack Lynch's government that the men were guilty.
There can be no compromise on fundamental policies.
All this business of the big brown eyes and the pipe and the gentle smile. But Lynch could be a hard man when he needed to be. And he
to thank the Ardèche for once again electing me as President of Fianna Fáil.
The opponents of Jack Lynch's policy on Northern Ireland attempted one last stand.
There was a dissident faction, and it was personified by Kevin Boland. He tried to speak, and then his supporters started shouting for him to be allowed to speak. And Patrick Hillery, who was Minister for Foreign Affairs, stood up. And Patrick Hillery was a relatively mild-mannered politician, but he stood up and he railed against them.
You can have Boland, but you can't have Fianna Fáil.
And that was a very decisive moment for Fianna Fáil.
At the 1971 Fianna Fáil Ardèche, Jack Lynch consolidated his control over the Fianna Fáil party. It was acknowledged that only peaceful means should secure a united Ireland.
Kevin Boland resigned from Fianna Fáil, and Neil Blaney was later expelled.
Blaney took a risk. He had real ambitions to be Taoiseach, and he saw himself as the leader of Fianna Fáil. So ultimately, the arms trial, and particularly his decision then to retreat to Donegal, ends his ambitions.
Charles Haughey had his own plan and stayed inside the party.
He showed the kind of the acumen, but also the slyness that were to characterise his future political career.
I know that it's not going to be easy.
You wouldn't talk to him about the arms trial. He felt aggrieved by what had happened. I suppose his response to that is, was, if you can't get mad, get even.
And he went through this very strange choreography of shaking hands with the Taoiseach Jack Lynch, shaking hands with Jim Gibbons, and eating his humble pie. That there was something else at play, and his personal ambition to become leader of Fianna Fáil was still driving him forward.
The Irish government can no longer stand by and see innocent people injured and perhaps worse.
The arms crisis was such a spectacular moment in the history of the state. It really is only 50 years ago.
Events at the heart of this crisis are still in dispute, even after 50 years. Those who knew most said very little.
Jack Lynch's reputation has changed over time. Initially, he was seen as somebody who had lost control, perhaps, of his party and really wasn't in touch what was happening. But it does seem, particularly as new papers have been made available at the National Archives, that Lynch had more knowledge than he let on.
Did Jack Lynch know? There's a lot to suggest that Jack Lynch did know, but didn't want to know, that he was apprised of what was happening. And he chose to ignore it in the way that kind of people ignored their debts.
There was no cabinet decision to buy arms. No matter what people knew, it wasn't an initiative of Jack Lynch. It wasn't an initiative of Jim Gibbons.
Lynch did not tell the truth. His policy on Northern Ireland had a hidden dimension. It involved a responsibility to the Northern nationalists, but he could never admit to it because it would have destroyed diplomatic relations with the United Kingdom.
He's regarded as a hero who saved democracy, who prevented a civil war. But it also, shouldn't be forgotten that to many nationalists in 1969, they expected him to do far more.
And the police, they threw bottles down the street at us and we had a good...
I think let down, a massive feeling of being let down. Jack Lynch washed his hands off it. That was how Charlie Haughey, Neil Blaney were sacked, and it was how my father was arrested and charged. It was how Captain Jim Kelly, who was carrying out his orders, was left as a pariah.
It really hurt him, and it really affected him for the rest of his life, and all of us. Certainly when I was growing up, it was always you've got money hidden, you've got IRA money hidden, we know what you did, and you're part of something sinister. Everywhere you went, you could never escape it.
We got beaten up, we got spat at. We were marked as being troublemakers. We're the people who caused this. My mother, God rest her, went to her grave without ever seeing my father's name cleared. It was
After the arms trial, Albert Loix never spoke about his involvement. John Kelly pursued his Republican aims in the IRA and Sinn Féin. Captain James Kelly campaigned for a state apology up to his death in 2003.
The last day when he was dying, he kept saying, "Is the apology there yet? Has it come yet?" And Suzanne said, "It has, but it hadn't." And he died very shortly after that. I think it was, he was holding on to the bitter end for that to come.